Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at the RG podcast. I'm joined with two very special guests. I always say special guests, but you guys are pretty cool. So I'm very honored to join you guys today. And we'll start off with Steve, since you've been on a few times. Steve, would you mind introducing yourself?
I am Steve Mazan, comedian and frequent guest of the podcast.
AKA Big Hollywood.
Big Hollywood. Yes, that's my nickname. Yeah.
All right. And would you mind introducing your friend, since you've invited him?
I would love to introduce my friend. He's not only one of the funniest cats I know, he's a great guy as well. And wrestling, besides a fantastic comedian, he's got a varied history that makes him a teacher, a wrestling coach, everything, and just a great raconteur, if I'm allowed to say that. Mr. Paul Douglas Moomjean.
Without further ado, let's get to Paul, the man of the hour. All right,
Hello.
Paul.
Yes. Steve and I actually last month were on the road together. We did a couple of casinos, and so it's been now about a month since I've seen your face, Steve. So it's good to see your face.
Yeah, good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. I am a comedian. I'm a writer. I also run a comedy school. So in Burbank. So I teach people who are trying to become comedians, people who want to know more about comedy, and people have been doing it for 3 to 20 years, and they just want to get another perspective or edge. So like Steve said, I have a varied background in education and coaching and writing. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to share my perspectives on stuff.
Yeah, really. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I would like if you guys could tell me your top 3 favorite comedy movies of all time.
Ooh, Steve, go first.
Let's see. Top 3 comedies.
Tell you what, I'll go first.
And
I already got mine.
Period. But yeah, let's hear yours. So give me a second to think. Let's hear.
So number 3 for me would be Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, bad call.
If only because the scene when he says, "Look at our lives, Lloyd. We have no friends. We have no jobs. Our
pets' heads are falling off."
That my brother and I still bond over that 25 years later.
Yeah.
Number 2 would be The Birdcage, which I think is the best comedy screenplay ever written. Nathan Lane and Robin Williams destroyed Azaria. I mean, that is Gene Hackman, Diane Weiss. You got Nichols directing, May writing, amazing. And for me, the best comedy of all time, this is more of a personal choice, is The Big Lebowski. That, which it's a comedy, but it's obviously just a big, over the top film. So. But though I would make an argument that the last 45 minutes of The Producers is probably the best segment of comedy film ever made. The Springtime for Hitler play is probably the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. The first one does not hold up for me as well. It's a little slow, a little awkward editing, but those 45 minutes at the end, up to the point where they're about to blow up the theater, is so funny on every level. Mel Brooks got an honorary Oscar, or at least won the story Oscar that year for that. I mean, that was an amazing film.
All right, so I'll go next, and I have to say number 1 is definitely Dumb and Dumber. Like literally, there was a summer when I was in junior high when it came out, or like right afterwards, where this is back when we used to have VHS tapes, man, if you guys remember that. Oh, yeah. But we watched that movie like an entire summer together every night with my family. I mean, it was quite an amazing thing. But second would be Step Brothers, and either Step Brothers or Dodgeball. Those two are kind of like neck and neck. And then number 3 is a little bit weird, and you and I have talked about this, Steve, but In Bruges, I know it's more of a dark comedy, but the dark comedy that whenever happens in there is just absolutely hysterical. Fantastic. So there goes my 3.
Yeah, those are great 3. Yeah, listen, there's no arguing with any of the movies you guys picked, and it's so tough. And mine probably they move up and down and stuff. So I'm gonna throw a couple alternatives. Like when I was a kid, there was when Caddyshack came out,
Caddyshack.
Talking about like we must have watched it 100 times and quoted it every single time. Stripes, I think, is up there for me just because like seeing it and quoting it with my friends when I saw it. You know, like I'm gonna say Bridesmaids is like a recent one where I'm like, that might be a perfect comedy. It's really, really funny. And then I'm gonna go. This is a weird one because it's super funny, but I love it for other reasons. Stir Crazy with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. And crazy enough, it's directed by the late, he just passed away, Sidney Poitier directed it. So it just cracks me up that Sidney Poitier, this guy who's all classy and stuff, basically directed this kind of jailhouse sex comedy. It's really funny.
I'll tell you which movie's funny. See no evil, hear no evil. That movie's quite hysterical.
Yeah.
But okay, so I want to actually, before we get started, I would like, Paul, if you could tell me a little bit about how long you've been doing comedy and what initially attracted you to comedy. So if you could just tell me that.
I started, I'm in my 8th year of stand-up, pure stand-up. I wrote for comedy shows at Nickelodeon prior to that. My grandma and my grandpa are probably responsible for my love of comedy because they would tape all the HBO specials and on their illegal black box. And I hope the FBI does not arrest my 86-year-old grandma now. But they would give me the tapes, and they would tell my mom, but they wouldn't tell my mom, and they wouldn't tell my dad, and they'd say, "Watch this." And so I was watching the George Carlin specials, the Damon Wayans specials, all of them, and they were Rodriguez, who I recently got to perform with. And so for me, I got into comedy because it became like this underground secret thing that I got to do with my grandparents. And then my grandpa loved George Carlin. Even though my grandpa was very conservative, he really liked George Carlin's kind of no-nonsense take on stuff. And that got me into comedy. And then over the years, I just started falling in love with it. And so, I became a big pop culture guy. Well, comedy reflects on popular culture so much that you start to realize, in the 90s, you watch a TV show, it starred a stand-up comedian. So then you start getting into their comedy, like Jerry Seinfeld, Tim Allen, George Lopez in the 2000s. All those guys, you start seeing what they're doing with comedy, and then you start to get into it. And now all of a sudden, I'm watching Sunday Spotlights as a kid with Bobby Collins or Rosie O'Donnell, and then I end up hosting for Bobby Collins a bunch of times now. So you watch the guy on TV when you're a kid, and now you're working with them, and they're, messaging you on Facebook going, "Hey, what time do I need to be there tonight?" And you're like, "Whenever you want."
Okay, well, all right. So I do want to share with something briefly I shared with Steve, is I suffered from some really debilitating depression in my life, and comedy really helped me out in some dark periods of my life. Literally, there were days I was so bad off that I would just go into my room and put on comedy, like just type in YouTube, people like Russell Peters. It really helped me through some really dark times. And when I got a divorce, I got into a little bit of stand-up. Wasn't very good, not nearly as good as you guys, but it was a good coping mechanism for me. So, all right. So that being said,
why'd you stop?
Well, you know what? Because it was more like a vetting process, like a venting, and the guys who I would go there with, it was like they all wanted to be something more like they all wanted to pursue it bigger, do like bigger shows. And it was kind of like just, in fact, the last episode, I just really thanked everyone. The last time I was there, I just thanked everyone for the opportunity for me to get some stuff off of my chest. But that being said, I do want to start off with this question. Steve will be helping me ask some of these questions. So Steve, if you have any follow-ups or would like to give your opinion, I'd really love to hear from you. But
all right, I'll give you my opinion. You should have kept doing comedy. There's no one's good at it for at least 2 years.
Okay, then I will tell you this. There was most of the times, sometimes I would bomb out, but there was one night I was just on fire. I mean, every joke landed, and then I know you guys know this. Whenever every joke lands, and then the next day or the next time, not a single joke lands, and you're just like, that is the most frustrating thing ever. So,
yeah.
All right. So I did write some pretty clever jokes. Maybe I'll tell you a few whenever I at the end. But so this is a question for both of you guys can get in here. But do you ever think that comedy can help to ease tensions, either in situations or maybe making light out of other situations, such as like social commentary? But what are your thoughts?
Paul, I'll let you take that one.
Well, I think that it depends on how skilled the person is with utilizing comedy. I actually made the argument that laughter is more powerful than love, because love is much more messy and complex. Humor is either you're laughing or you're not. And so I can love someone and then misinterpret it. I can do that with a joke, but at least if they don't laugh, I know I was ineffective in my attempt to connect. Whereas with love, I can desperately try to connect with someone and it comes across as, needy. And so a smart person can make a joke to lighten the mood, realize it's not working, back off. Whereas with love, if I keep sending you flowers, at some point the cops come. So I think it's important that we understand that if we're using it as a defense mechanism, like I had a friend who used to get upset when my buddies and I would discuss politics and religion, and he'd make jokes to lighten up, but we're like, no, we're having a real conversation here.
Don't be funny. Yeah.
So don't be funny. But he used it as a way because it made him uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I would say that, yes, it can help ease tensions. I don't know if that's how we're going to solve world issues. I don't think anybody, solves homelessness with a joke. But I do think that we can use humor as a way to get out of something. That I think if Steve and I are arguing, and then I can make, but can we both agree we hate so and so? Then he laughs, I laugh, and then we get out together.
Right.
All right, Steve, you got any thoughts or any follow-ups?
Yeah, well, I think Paul's right on those points, and just about the love and laughter thing. I've laughed at plenty of comedians that I don't like or love. You know what I mean? Like, you don't even have to like the person. You have to like a person to love them. You don't have to like a person to laugh at them. So yeah, it is more powerful in that way. I think Paul's right. Paul, you do that. I would say, hanging out with you, you're a guy like that. Yeah, you use it as a diffuser.
Well, that also comes from my teaching training. I mean, I taught 7th grade. And when you teach 7th grade, you have to learn real quickly that the students are going to attack each other. The students are going to attack you because they're learning who they are. They're learning boundaries. And so humor was a way to be able to diffuse the situation. Yeah. And as a teacher, if I don't have humor, then there's nothing to break the tension or a boring subject matter, right? So if I'm going to teach something like the history of William Shakespeare, which most kids don't care about, which is fine. Most people don't. Adults don't. I got to use humor as a way to engage, come in, and then find a way to get out. And that's where I was the funny teacher. I was the funny teacher before I did stand-up.
That's funny because you're not the funny comedian.
Oh, no.
I'm just kidding.
Our friends are
Sorry, it was left open. It was left open. You left it open. But to that point, Paul, and I know you've read the book, Steve Martin says in his book, Born Standing Up, that the closest job to stand-up comedian is teacher.
Yeah.
Really?
Because you have to be entertaining for 8 hours a day, right?
Yeah. You're up there. Yeah. You're more interesting than what's outside the window, which is a bird.
So that, I will tell you this. So in college, I was at a junior college my sophomore year, and I had this professor who was like an ex-Vietnam veteran, and he had like this scar across his face.
Yeah.
And this guy was literally like, he could have done a stand-up routine for like, I don't know how he was able to do this, but he would also use a lot of profanity in class. And I've never seen a professor use profanity, but he didn't care. He would freely use it, and he would freely like mock religious ideas or whatever. I mean, it was like the time just flew by. Hours would go by.
This guy sounds awesome.
Yeah. Oh God, he was a little bit crazy because.
Well, that's I was just gonna say too. The scar, and I'm sure shell shocked and all that kind of stuff. But yeah,
Absolutely.
make for an entertaining teacher for sure.
Oh God, yeah. So let's see. So I do want to ask you this because I think it's called the Al Smith. I was gonna say, yeah, maybe Al Smith, but every year, every presidential cycle, both candidates get together and they roast each other and they raise money for like children's. I mean, I believe it's Al Smith. Is that right?
I know that there's the I don't know about that, but I was I guess thinking more of the correspondence dinner, right? That usually
no, it's not the correspondence dinner. I think it's like a Catholic organization. Anyway, yeah. The point is that at the end of the election cycle, right before the elections, they get together and they kind of just make fun of themselves and everybody. They do a lot of self-deprecating humor, but I think that's a good sign of goodwill. Like, okay, if we're in a country and we're in an election, that we can come together and just kind of like make fun of this whole system and even make fun of ourselves. It's pretty fun to make fun of yourselves. But do you think that maybe in politics that could be used a little bit more? What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
Well, I mean, all politicians have writers. So, I wouldn't want to see a politician go off the cuff and try to do their own jokes. That would be awful. I mean, we wouldn't have real news anymore. We just have, it's what kind of happened with Trump, right? Like he said something outrageous and then that becomes the news story. And meanwhile, the economy goes through its own cycles and we're unaware because we're too busy wondering what obnoxious things
right.
said. I don't think humor fixes policy. So let the comedians mock the policymakers and let the policymakers make it hard for the comedians to mock them.
There you go.
And that's not what's happening. What's happening is you have bigger personalities. So I don't want a funny president. I don't want a funny president. This is why I feel like Hillary would have been a really good president. Least funny person in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So give the least funny person a chance.
Yeah.
And so, that might be, but we don't do that. We elect personalities. And so those who do not have personalities, since basically Eisenhower was the last non-personality. And then after that, it was JFK was charming, Nixon snuck in. But besides that, I mean, everybody's kind of a cool uncle or a grandpa figure.
Well, you know what? I will say this for all the 2000 things we could say wrong about Donald Trump, the transphobia, the Islamophobia, all the other stuff. That guy was pretty dang funny to watch, man. The kind of ways that he would go after people. And I kind of told people this, like when we were in middle school, we would take people's names and try to like switch up a syllable or take like the first letter. And I mean, we did some really creative stuff to people's names, but it's like we literally grew up like that didn't go into high school. Like it stayed in middle school. And so to see the kind of stuff that it was embarrassing. Don't get me wrong, because I live in South Korea, but at least you could say, man, at least he was not, at least just one thing you cannot accuse him of is being boring. So, you know what?
That is true. There was yes, there was something about being on the edge of your seat every day you woke up.
You're literally
what happened?
Not knowing what to expect. Yeah,
Diesel,
okay.
You're behind the times. That was third grade when we used to. You waited to junior high to mess up the kids' names.
Well, I mean, we did it all the way through.
Imagine what you could do with that.
Yeah, we did it all the way through. Maybe I should have specified that. We got really good. We got really good in middle school because they're a little bit more developed. But okay. So the second one is, I know, Paul, you are a believer, a Christian, correct?
Yes.
So I'm a Christian as well, but I've seen some people use like sacrilegious or irreverent humor, even pastors, sometimes, and maybe sometimes making fun of the absurdity of some of the stuff that we actually believe, say like the Trinity or something like that, because it doesn't really make sense by human standards. And so what are your thoughts on like religious humor, and if stuff like, I don't know, is there anything like sacred? Are there any sacred cows that like you just don't touch? Or what are your thoughts on that as like a believer?
Well, I think that the Christian has the responsibility not to say things that would go against his own belief system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a person who doesn't believe in the Trinity makes jokes about the Trinity. What is that to me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like so someone mocked my religion. I mean, that's the whole name Christian was literally a mockery name. It was these little Christs. That's what they called them. That's where the word Christian comes from. It's an actual put down. So from a historical standpoint, all religions have been mocked all the time. I mean, they used to tar and feather the Mormons. So the way I look at it is, if a comedian goes on stage like George Carlin and says this is what's wrong with religion, and if he's making a point from a humanistic point of view, wonderful. The only issue I would have is straw man arguments, right? When someone makes the joke too easy, right? It's but I make fun of my church. You know, when there was a church I was attending, there was a Christian school that I worked at, and I mocked personalities and things that were, you know, I felt were a bad representation of Christianity. And, you know, people who thought that their Christianity was more important than being good at their job. You know, like I did a whole bit on that. Like, people completely underqualified to be teachers, but hey, you know, they had a Bible, so we paid them $38,000 a year to ruin people's lives forever. So, wow. You know, that's where I think it is what it is. But I will say that, you know, I don't have any problem at all with anybody mocking a religion. I think one of the funniest musicals I've ever seen is the Book of Mormon, and I can look at that and I can go, well, sure, it's because it's not my faith, right? The Mormon faith and my Protestant faith are not the same. They just aren't. What I can say is that if they did that to me, I probably would laugh too, because it's not too far off in the language. So as long as it's not a straw man, then I'm usually okay with it.
What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Well, I have just a follow-up question. I agree. I think Paul's right. Although I'm sure there are people, and to your point, that make fun of it, that are believers themselves, right? And find a way to. There are these things that are funny, or these things that I'm a true believer, but I have problems with this angle and that kind of thing. Like I know Gaffigan. I don't know what his actual religion is, but I know he's got a lot of stuff in there. And I was going to say Cosby. I mean, Cosby. Oh
God!
But I'm sure
he has some other issues he's got to worry about.
Considers himself a Christian, but he's got some great bits on the Noah's Ark and like that kind of stuff. But I have a follow-up question here, Paul. What, as a non believer is not the right word, but non-Christian, like deep into the weeds on that stuff, is there anything? Because the Bible is written. There's lots of jokes about it, but is there any part of the Bible that is funny purposely? Is there any of the writing that is comedy, that it's supposed to be?
There's a lot.
I would say there's definitely Paul, the Apostle Paul, uses exaggeration and sarcasm. In his writings, when you think about when he says that our good works are like filthy rags to God. I mean, that if that's not an exaggeration punchline, nothing. Right? I could see him going to the people in Rome and going like, oh, look at your filthy rags. Look, give them to Jesus. Like a Kramer voice, right? I could see that. All of Jesus's parables could be argued had a certain comic form, right? Like, if you look at the story of the prodigal son, right? Very famous story, right? This is the story of the prodigal son. This kid goes to his dad, says, "Hey, I wish you were dead so I could have all your money." Then he takes all the money and spends it the whole time sleeping with whores and gambling. And then he comes back, and his dad, as the parable says, was running back to him in forgiveness with his junk in the wind.
Yeah.
So when you look at the stories in the Bible, there is a comedic flair to it. It's just not what's emphasized.
Right.
But the stories are written. I mean, even the story of Job is a comedy in a tragedy way. You know what I mean? Like, if I say to you, okay, your wife dies. What a sad story. Your wife, all your children, and the goats. The goats.
Yeah. The exaggeration. Yeah, it's a great point.
Exaggeration of it. It's a rule of threes every time.
Yeah. You know what? So actually, I'm probably sure some of this stuff you wouldn't pick up on culturally as Steve, because just, I don't know, there's probably half of the stuff we wouldn't really be able to understand unless we were like, can somehow try to transport our minds back 2,000 years ago to try to truly understand what Jesus was saying. It's pretty hard to do that from the comforts of like, my iPad or something, to try to know exactly what Jesus was saying whenever he was saying these things. But he did say some stuff that, like, if you were to hear him say it, you would have definitely thought he's funny. Like for example, he's talking about like being overly religious but having like a messed up heart, and he says you go through the trouble of like trying to strain out a little gnat, but he goes, and then you turn around and you swallow a whole camel. So it's a pretty brilliant analogy. And whenever I use that same analogy, I tell people about, well, what if you're making coffee? There's a little bit of dirt. You strain it like 5 times to try to get that little bit of dirt out, but then you turn around and you eat like a big pile of elephant poop. It's the same kind of analogy that you're doing something so much worse, and then you're doing something worse than the other person you're trying to pick something out at. And you know what I mean? Like for instance, here's another example. He says, before you try to take a little thing out of someone else's eye, he says, you got like a log hanging out of your eye. So if you actually process what he's saying there, it's pretty dang hilarious. If you can imagine a guy with a log, like whacking stuff around, trying to take out a little small thing in someone else's eye, it's pretty funny. But I do want to say one thing, because I went to a Christian school, and I guess they consider this like, if you make fun of God or whatever, it's like it's blasphemy. But for me, I'm like, dude, if I'm like God, like, like if I found out some ants were telling some jokes about me, like, I don't understand why that would upset me if I'm so much greater and bigger than as a being. Because some people, like, I've made some religious jokes and they've gotten really offended by it, like, oh, you said something against Jesus or the Bible, whatever. But it's like, man, I ultimately I see that God is the person who would have had to have created comedy. So it's not like he doesn't understand it, what it is, I'm sure he'd probably tell the best one-liners there are to tell, but that's just my own personal opinion.
Oh, is that in the Bible 10 Commandments? Is that like that kind of, is one of the commandments not forsaking God in some way like that? And
well, not taking the Lord's name in vain.
Nothing about, like, not like in the Muslim world, like, not the iconic, iconography and like that kind of thing.
Graven image.
Yeah. Is that Christian as well? Does that transfer there or no? Are you? I know we've obviously, because I've heard people joke about that especially Catholics have gone too far with the Jesus iconography of like him on the cross and the bleeding and all this stuff, whereas that the idea was, because all these religions kind of came from the same area. At one point, it was the same way with Christianity to not make these images and stuff. But is that literally in the Bible, or is that just the way it evolved?
I think the difference is, right? So you have the Old Testament, in which God is only revealed as spirit, right? There's no formation of God. Whereas in the New Testament, Jesus was fully man. And therefore, an image of Christ as a man, he walked as a man, he talked as a man. Therefore, you can have an image of him and it not be sacrilegious. Whereas people who draw pictures of God, you could make the argument that you're not supposed to do that from a religious standpoint. But Christ, that's why in the Muslim faith, a lot of people, and even in the Jewish faith at the time when Christ came, when he compared himself to God, that was a huge problem because he was putting definable pictures on the Spirit of God. So I think that there's that argument to be made. But if somebody has a picture, like when Jesus pops up in a little sketch part of an aside in Family Guy, 9 times out of 10, I'll giggle at it. I'll think it's kind of funny. My favorite one was when they do Jesus.
Black Jesus.
And it's when Jesus returns and he's just shorter than everybody. And he goes, guys, we talked about this. Everybody was 5'3" in Israel back in, 30 AD. So I think there's something very fun there. You can have some fun with that type of cultural expectation. But no, you're technically Christians and Jews, Muslims are not supposed to do anything with God the Father, I would say.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to tell one quick story, and then I'll go over to the next one, because I was taking a philosophy of religion, and they were playing a debate from a Christian and an atheist. And the atheist guy, he's like, okay, let me get this straight. He says, God comes down and gets a woman pregnant, and then he essentially gives birth to himself. He goes, that's better than I'm my own grandpa. And when he said that, I started busting up laughing. And I was the only one to laugh, because everyone was like, you just laughed at that. I was like, it was a funny joke, man. It was a funny, you can't really control it, whether or not you find something funny or not. It was just, his delivery was extremely funny as well. But you know what? I do want to give a little bit of context to this next one, because so I'm Mexican, Latino, Perez, and growing up, my best friends were black. One of my best friends was black, and the other best friend was black and white. So we call ourselves like the Rainbow King. We had black, Mexican, and white. And these guys are both like 6 feet. The white guy is 6'7". But I've got a little bit desensitized to racial joke, because we're always making fun of each other's race. Like, it's just going to sound so crazy, but he would come over to my house and tell like a bunch of Mexican jokes in front of my family. And my dad just thought it was the funniest thing on the planet. And, but for us, it's like, we just totally did not see the racial element. I have to be really careful with this, because not everybody finds the kind of jokes amusing that I do. But we were so tight that like the white guy actually fought his own cousin because he called that guy the N-word. But in my own opinion, it's like, the more we can have people like Hassan Minaj or Carlos Mencia, and they come out and they say these racial jokes, they make fun of themselves and make fun of others. Like, it seems to me that takes a bit of a bite out of the racial element. But as we know, definitely over the last 5 or 6 years, things got really bad. So I'm wondering if either of you guys can give me your thoughts on that, about, and we'll give this over to you, Steve, first, about whether or not that can help out with racial tensions, and or if that's just should be something left off the table. Steve.
Yeah, well, this obviously is a touchy subject, especially now, the times. But I think there's a pendulum that swings back and forth on this, and I think we're very far to one end where people are holding back on talking about this. The same way I grew up. It's not the same in the value of it, but I grew up in a Polish family, and we loved Polish jokes, and it was all about Polish people being stupid and stuff like that. We would tell them the thing. I do think there's a difference. This is what's been lost as the pendulum has swung too far one way right now. There's no nuance between the difference between, some people see no difference between a racial joke and a racist joke. And I think there's a difference between those. One has intention and one doesn't. And so, yeah, racial humor, always funny. And, then if you're purposely trying to bring a race down and it's racist, that's a different thing. But yeah, Paul and I are comedians. I can't guess at what he's going to say. He's very thoughtful, so he's going to have a great answer at this. But I'm just saying, we are both still comedians, so it's hard. Comedians are always going to say, it's just laughter. That's just jokes. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. We lean that way as a whole. That's how we grew up. That's why we became comedians, is because we're much easier to laugh at anything, or say, hey, there is no taboo. We can throw it against any wall, and I'll laugh at any topic, whether it's religion, racial, or some awful, terrible thing that can happen to a person. We will laugh at it before probably the average person. I do think there's a value in it, though, that does bring people together. I think a lot of times that's how groups come together on that. I think there's a value if you watch Richard Pryor's, which I think is the greatest special of all time, comedy special, Richard Pryor Live, shot in Long Beach. It's one of those where he makes fun of all the races and that kind of thing. I'll bet that crowd left that evening feeling closer than they did than when they came to each other. I bet so. So I bet so. I think it does bring people together, and we're too far the other way. We're not there now, but I think that'll come back where the nuance will come back to it at least. But yeah, Paul, what do you think?
Well, I think that the crux of the argument is what was mentioned earlier, which is when my friends and I were together. So you have a relationship, therefore you're able to make fun of each other because you know the intention is always coming from a place of goodwill and humor. So take a comedian who's 30 years into the game making racial jokes, very different than someone who's 1 month into the game, right? So why is it that Dave Chappelle can make a Chinese act out in one of his specials and everyone laughs and giggles, but then Shane Gillis does it on a podcast before we all know him and he gets canceled from Saturday Night Live because we had no relationship with Shane Gillis. If we have a relationship with the comedian, they can do whatever they want. Right now, Paul Thomas Anderson did a whole movie where one of the characters did awful Japanese act outs, okay? But it's Paul Thomas Anderson. We love him as a filmmaker. He got nominated for director, picture, and screenwriter for the exact jokes that any young person would have been canceled for. So if the relationship is there, we allow people to do it. Richard Pryor talking about race, perfectly acceptable. Someone else talking about race who we don't know, it's now questionable.
Interesting.
So what I tell my students who come in and they're brand new, right? They're brand new to comedy. And they're going, but Richard Pryor, but Dave Chappelle, but they get to, and I go, stop. It took them 30 years to be able to do whatever they wanted and maintain a fan base that would still pay to see them. So you have to build that relationship, but they didn't start there. So you look at a young Chris Rock, you look at a young Richard Pryor, you look at a young George Carlin, they started in a very different place. Built the trust of the audience. Once you build the trust, you can do what you want to do. If you cross that line, they will let you know, and more than likely you will be forgiven. But that's what it really comes down to, is do we trust you? And do you have a reason to be talking about this? If it's just to be racial or racist, we'll catch that. If this actually affects you, I'll give you a great example. I got a buddy, and Steve may know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to say him here. He was born in the Central Valley of California, does Latino act outs about being called rooster by the Latino community. And he does the whole act out, the impression, the whole thing. And it's hysterical because it would make sense that he's talking about his relationship to being a white person in a different ethnic background community. He also does impressions of Snoop Dogg. So no one has a problem with it because there's a reason why he can get away with talking about it. If someone went in there and just decided to make fun of the Central Valley for having a lot of Mexicans and doing a racial accent, now there's a problem. And that's where comedians have to know where the line is.
Yeah, so I want to get in here because my sister is a lawyer. She's actually on the Jon Stewart show, actually. Pretty interesting story there. But so when she was in law school, I used to call her every week and tell her like a lawyer joke, you know? Because I'd get online, learn these lawyer jokes. I was constantly berating lawyers. You know, it's just kind of like it'd give her a laugh every week. But you know, we have jokes for farmers or you know, clowns or politicians, whatever. There's a wide range of jokes, police officers, and it seems like everything else is fair game. But as soon as you start mentioning something about race, like a lot of people get really touchy about. And see, I don't know. My idea is like, maybe it's not the best idea, but I would really like to see more Lisa Lampanelli's or Carlos Mencia's who just say, like, I'm gonna go after everybody. Like, that's the only way I could be non-discriminatory, is that if I just legitimately take a shot at everybody. And so, who's the other one? He's like, are there? Oh yeah, Russell Peters. He's like, here, are there any Chinese people here? All right, well, let's talk about them. So funny, so funny. But all right. So we got a last one. And this one is, this is also one in your own life, not just for comedy itself, but how does one know when they've personally crossed a proverbial line, and where would you personally, or have you ever drawn a line between, okay, maybe I have the right to say this, but I'm just not going to say it because I don't want to face the backlash, or I just generally don't want to upset this community. I've recently had something myself do this podcast relating to the trans topic, and I kind of just had to come to the conclusion, like, look, it's better off I just don't even address this, because even if you try to talk about it in a way that at least you find to be respectful or accommodating, like, not everyone sees it that way. So I've kind of just had to say, well, there's probably some battles I should probably pick and choose, But do you guys have any thoughts on that, about how you know when you cross the line, and if you can come back to the line again, if you start over, or what are your thoughts?
Well, first off, I'm glad you think Steve and I are so famous that we're going to get canceled when we're on stage. That is an honor. Actually, I would say it goes back to my comment of, if you have a reason to talk about it, usually it's okay, right? So I think where like, I made a joke the other day where I was talking about the masks, and I compared it to other cultures that cover the faces of their community, and the audience was with me up until that point, and then I realized I crossed the line. The joke was, oh, so that's where I lose you. Great. Everybody supports the people who don't believe in freedom. I like this. And I get a laugh on that, and I just move on to another topic. So, but it depends. I mean, I don't think I'm giving away too much here, but Steve and I aren't performing on national television every night. This isn't Colbert or, Jimmy Kimmel, who actually have more at risk with every joke they say. Mm-hmm. We're in casinos, bars, and clubs.
And backyards. You've done some backyards.
Right, and backyards. I mean, I'm never getting canceled. I do a show, and then maybe a drunk girl goes, "You can't say that," and then I go, "Well, I just did."
Right.
It's over. So this idea of cancellation, first off, it's a boogeyman. It only happens to people who, Lauren Michaels is talking to. So Lauren Michaels isn't talking to me, and when Lauren Michaels starts talking to me, I'll just do jokes about Hot Pockets.
Mm-hmm. Steve, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, Paul nails it. That's it. And the audience, I always say it's the audience. People always, ask how did you learn to do comedy or whatever. I think your audience tells you what's funny about you. You go up there and you try and be funny, and then over doing it a lot of times, the audience tells you what is funny about you. You thought that was what was funny about you. That's not what's funny about you. When you talk about this, that's what's funny about you. And I think it's the same way with crossing the line. The audience lets you know. And sometimes you cross the line with the whole audience. And as Paul said, you have a relationship with that audience. You built a relationship. So maybe, you can tell a joke 30 minutes in that you couldn't tell 2 minutes in. And that kind of, so it's a high wire act. And I'll give you an example. The other night I was doing a bar show, and I have a joke about LA is the best place to do comedy because we have the best. It makes you tough because we have the best hecklers. Mexican hecklers are the greatest hecklers in the world. And some guy in the audience was like, "You can't say that." Like, you can't do it. I was like, "I'm saying they're the best. What are you talking about?" Like,
they're the best, right?
And then he got mad that I was like, "Oh, that's all they could do is be heckling." I was like, "No, I'm not saying that's all they could do. I'm just saying they're the best." And the whole audience was with me on it, but except one guy. So again, there's sometimes it's half the audience is with you and half isn't. And sometimes as comedians, what we want a little tension. We want the audience to be like, "Ooh, I don't know where you're going with this. And then when you hit the punchline, it's a big release. You know what I mean? Like,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What race was the guy that did that?
Take a guess. I'll give you a guess.
I'm going to guess he's white.
He's a white guy. Yeah.
Right. Which only proves right. The Mexicans are better hecklers, and he's proving it by heckling you.
He proved it in that moment, literally. Yes. Why white people are bad hecklers.
Actually, this is a really good segue, because I was going to ask you about hecklers and if you've ever had a really bad experience, or one that might have thrown something or maybe became extremely belligerent or violent, maybe for something you said, or just maybe they're drunk, or you got any fun stories, Paul?
Okay, so, well, it's only fun because I'm a man. Listen, I don't get heckled very much. I have teacher stink. Okay, nobody wants. There's no joy in heckling me. I'm a 5'7", 5'8" in the right pair of shoes, Seth Rogen look-alike. Okay?
Oh, I just saw it.
So there's no. I'm the least threatening guy in the world. It's been a wonderful gift. Okay, but one time when I was hosting for Tom Segura at the 10 o'clock show, his crazies came out from the podcast. Now, this is about 7 years ago, okay? And he had one girl in the front row, just massive breasts, and they're already pouring out. And she's drunk. And I do a joke about how my mom wants me to get married so she can be a grandma, right? Not so that I can be happy, so that she can be a grandma. And the girl in the front row yells out, "I'll pop one out for you."
Oh my God.
And I didn't know how to handle it at the time. I'm a couple years in. I'm not sure what to do. I don't want to turn the show into her. But I get myself through it. I massaged it over. It was fine. I see that girl later at the bar. She comes up to me. Now, this is a tattooed 25-year-old gorgeous girl. She's a model. She let everyone know that, right? She's at the bar. I'm having a drink, and she goes, something to the effect of like, "Did you have fun tonight?" And I go, "I had fun." She goes, "This will make it more fun." And she lifts her top.
Oh my gosh.
Her breasts. And she starts to, and I in the moment go, "Excuse me, you need to put those away now because we're in Burbank and there's laws." And she puts the shirt down and she goes, "You're really weird." And I go, "You have no idea." And so I have an ability to stay very calm in heckler situations when the crowd is turning. I don't get scared or nervous because here's the thing I've convinced myself. Comedy does not begin and end with that show I'm on. Comedy began in August 8 years ago when I got on the stage for the first time. And comedy ends when I die. Comedy doesn't end when somebody heckles my show, ruins my joke, whatever. That's part of the process. I get paid at 80% of my shows now. The other 20% is me taking 10 minutes to work on some material. And even then, I usually ask for gas money. So I'm in a position now where every time I'm getting on stage, there's value in that experience. So I don't worry about hecklers or if things go bad or what's happening from that perspective. I'm looking at it as, am I getting myself ready for when Netflix one day happens to come across a Car special and says, "We want to film your next one." See, that's where I'm at now. And that's how I have to approach every gig, everywhere I go, because I actually right now am actually working with a student of mine who came to me and said, "I want to pitch a show, but I need someone with a better comedic mind." And now we're pitching shows, and we're pitching shows to big people. But if I would have seen this as, no, I need to be with the right people. I need this. You're just a student. No, he had connection. So if I look at the world from the perspective of it's an always ongoing process, then I'm not going to live in that moment of rejection or that moment of fear. I'm just going to we're just going to pass by it and move on.
So if you're trying to get into Netflix or Hollywood, you're definitely going to want to talk to Steve over here because he's had his own documentary made about him. And
also
Steve,
has a Netflix account.
That's a great joke. Steve, do you have any funny or crazy heckler stories you can share?
I mean, again, that one I was telling you about too. It was just the other night about the Mexican guy or the non-Mexican guy. Angry about that. I am competitive. I'm competitive. What's up, Paul? What'd you say, Paul?
You had to kick me out.
Yes, I've kicked Paul out. But you weren't heckling though. You were just disrupting. As Paul mentioned, like even in Steve Martin's other thing that he says about, and it goes to what Paul said. Teaching is like comedy. The enemy of comedy isn't a heckler. The enemy of comedy is distraction. And so, I've kicked Paul out because he's distracting. He's talking to someone in the back of the room. So he wasn't heckling, but he was just talking. So I'm like, out if you're going to talk. Yeah. Like you're done.
That's funny.
But as Paul, and this probably comes from the same place. I'm competitive, not with Paul or the other comedians. I'm competitive with
yourself,
with myself, and with an audience. If a heckler is just someone who thinks in that moment they're helping you, or they're funnier than you, or very often the worst hecklers I think can be people who think you have made it look easy on stage, so they think I
can do it.
I'm gonna all of a sudden jump in and start.
I can do it.
I can do this too. And so in those moments, I'm very competitive, and I will laser focus, and sometimes too hard. So yes, I've had moments where my sister has been at the show, and the police have arrived, and they're like, "You need to leave out the back, and we're going to take these other guys." This team is going to leave out the front because you went at them too hard, and now they want to kick your butt.
Oh my gosh! So, wow. Steve. Wow, that is
a smarter person like Paul would just be like, all right, this set means nothing. No one's going to remember it. That's in the moment. I'm like, no, I'm protective of this show. Mm-hmm. I am not going to let you ruin this show. And again, I will tell you this. Paul's approach is the better approach. Mm-hmm. It's just there's something in me that it rises up though. Like it's like a competition that in that moment. It's like no. I'll prove to you I can win this back. I'll take this back from you.
So real quick before we get into any last thoughts, I do want to say this, that Jamie Kennedy, who had a show called The Jamie Kennedy Experiment, which I thought was the funniest like prank show that's ever been created, right up there with actually like Jackass and Punk'd, but it's absolutely hysterical if you've never seen it. But he made a movie called, or like a documentary called Heckler. I think that's what it's called. But it's really good, actually. It's about, and he basically describes, the whole thing is kind of like describing the online critics as being like hecklers, but like off stage. But anyway, it's really interesting.
I saw it. It ends up. He doesn't draw a distinct line in there between. It's called heckler, but it's more about critic, I think, is what critic and couch critic kind of thing.
It's really good.
A very small part that ends up being a guy what we think of as yelling from an audience at a comment. A lot of like what you're talking about is what critics think, or people who comment on stuff online and stuff like that, which I separate those.
Yeah. So I do want to get into some last thoughts, and I will say this, that speaking about racial stuff, I can tell you this very specifically, living in South Korea, that there is a lot of things that we would, as the West, would find funny that they don't find funny. Steve, I told you the episode where I went and saw one of my favorite movies, which is In Bruges, and they didn't understand any of the comedy. So I'm sitting there in the movie theater laughing like a madman, and I looked totally crazy because they didn't catch any of the humor, any of the dark humor. But the point is, though, is that even if we might see something differently, everybody knows that feeling of laughter and how it could take away, it doesn't solve your problems, but it could temporarily take your mind off of whatever is going on. And then also to sometimes really it might be the only thing that you can resort to in a situation. Like literally you might not have any other options than just to try to make fun of it, or even make fun of yourself. I found that people will get far more upset with me whenever I try to pretend like I didn't make a mistake, as if I just come up and own it and even maybe make fun of myself in the process. They sometimes like, oh, okay, like you don't need to be that hard. Okay, it's like, it's a common mistake, but that can sometimes be helpful. if we can see a comedic side, like how could I really screw up this bad, and just try to find the positive in whatever situation. But Paul, you got any last thoughts?
No, I think this is really good. I'm glad that two white people were brought on here to discuss racial issues.
With a Mexican. Oh, you guys token Mexican guy here.
We'll go with the empirical evidence.
Yes, no, I think that I think at the end of the day that if people purposely take time out of their life to find an opportunity to laugh, that's a good thing. And so that's one thing that comedy does do is you literally can look online and you could type in comedy clubs in my neighborhood and you can find a thing and you can go and you can say for the next 2 hours, I'm dedicating my brain, I'm dedicating my spirit, I'm dedicating myself to laughing, and hopefully the comedian brings it and hopefully the show is worth it. I know when Steve and I perform, it always is 100% perfect every time. And then
that's a joke.
And then when people like Jerry Seinfeld perform, it's 50-50. So, it's just a matter of people going out and finding an opportunity to laugh.
Well, all right, Steve, any last thoughts?
Nope. I think he summed it up perfectly.
So
all right.
Jerry Seinfeld, 50-50.
Then, without further ado, Mr. Paul, very grateful to have you today, and you're gonna endow us with a few minutes of your comedic prowess. If you wouldn't mind, take it away, brother.
Let's endow. I'm excited to be here, but I'm also excited because, guys, I've lost 50 pounds recently.
Woo!
Thank you. I feel like I no longer look like a fat guy who has to lose 50, but instead I look like a skinny guy who just gained 30. Like neither of you clapped, and that's okay.
No, that was good. That was good. That was good. It took a while to register.
Oh, it took a while to I like how I'm doing thinkers up front. That's a good way to do comedy. Thinkers up front. I actually, because of this, I have a newfound confidence on dating apps, and I'm on all of them right now. Bumble, Tinder, Venmo. Because when you pay, they stay. I don't want to brag. I mean, I know with a couple of men here, I don't want to brag, but I recently matched on Bumble with a former Miss Columbia contestant.
Ooh.
From 1964. She broke up with me. Think about that. I wasn't part of the retirement plan, obviously. I enjoy doing stand-up comedy. I actually teach stand-up comedy during the week for health insurance because there's no health insurance in stand-up comedy. But let me tell you, some of the students, a little difficult. I actually had a mother call me up in the middle of the pandemic. I was teaching on Zoom, and she said, "Can my 13-year-old son take your comedy class?" And originally I said, no, because there's adults in the class. But then I remembered, we have an expression in comedy school. When your mother's credit card goes through, comedy is for you. So we're doing this interview session, and he's showing us his room on the iPad, and he comes across his big, fat, stupid cat, and I go, my God, the cat's huge. He goes, yeah, we have no idea. I said, well, the camera does add 10 pounds.
Yeah.
I go, how many cameras are on the cat? He goes, I don't know. How many cameras are on you, fatty? Now, I taught high school and junior high for 16 years, and I'm going to stand by this statement. That was the most respectful kid I ever taught. What I love most right now is that we're finally doing live comedy again. I got a paid gig 2 weeks ago. You guys have been lovely. The paid gig, not so lovely. Did the old folks home. 2 minutes into my set, I hear this. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yes, sir. I'm leaving. Can I ask why? Because you're not that funny, and I don't have much longer to live.
Well, that was good.
2 hours to leave the room and have to watch the whole setting. Look like an angry Bernie Sanders out of the way. Get out of my way. Where's the 1%? Thank you. That's my.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. That was great. All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much. Check us out at www.rgpodcast.com. I think just one last final thought is unfortunately, I'm not as talented as you two, but that has been one thing I've tried to use comedy to either make fun of myself, sometimes make fun of the guest, or sometimes just make fun of America or whatever. But, it really helps in conversations whenever we're discussing politics or religion and things like that. So if we can just take a little step aside, apart from this heated argument, and just maybe try to make light of a little situation or throw in a little zinger every now and again, it could hopefully help us to have more civil and meaningful conversations, because the more we're enjoying ourselves, the more we can talk about and to learn from each other. So we want to thank you for joining us today. And check us out at YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, just about everywhere you can find someone, you can find us. And we want to leave you with this last slideshow. And we look forward to seeing you back again. And goodbye.